11 Japanese rules for a fresh-smelling home. Americans ignore everyone. Your house has a smell. Not a bad smell. Not a good smell. Just a smell. And the person who notices it most is never you. It walked in with your guests the moment they crossed your front door. It settled into your mattress 8 years ago and never left. And the billion-dollar industry selling you candles, plug-ins, and fabric softener needs you to never figure out what it actually is. Tonight, you will. Welcome to Hidden Fix Lab, the place where we dig past the product aisle and find out what actually works. Now, before we go any further, I want to ask you something, and I mean this sincerely. If you're over 50 years old and you still remember when people cleaned their homes without buying a single product off a shelf, do this channel a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Because what we are about to cover is exactly the kind of knowledge your generation understood, and somewhere along the way, the rest of us forgot. And wherever you're watching from tonight, drop it in the comments below. Whether you are in Texas or Toronto, Manchester or Manila, let us know. This community is bigger than most people realize, and we want to know who is in the room. In the year 794 AD, something quiet happened in Japan. It did not make headlines. It was not a war. It was not a discovery of gold or land. It was a decision about how to live inside a home. The imperial court moved to a city called Heian-kyo. That city is known today as Kyoto, and the people who settled there brought with them a set of household rules that had been passed down for generations before that. These were not decorating tips. They were not religious rituals. They were a system, a working system built around one simple idea, that a home should never accumulate what does not belong inside it. The rules were recorded in household texts from that period. Scholars have studied these documents for decades. One of the most detailed records comes from writings connected to the Heian court lifestyle, a way of living that placed extraordinary attention on air, fabric, moisture, and the invisible things that settle into a space when no one is paying attention. Japanese households at that time had no chemical sprays, no scented plugins, no fabric softener. Every surface had a purpose. Every object had a home. Every morning began with air moving through the space. Every night ended with the kitchen dry and the sleeping area cleared. These were not poetic ideals. They were practical instructions passed from one generation to the next, and for over 1,000 years they worked. A British environmental researcher named Dr. Roger Ulrich was studying indoor air quality in Western households. He was trying to understand why certain homes in Northern Europe and North America had significantly higher concentrations of mold, dust mites, and volatile organic compounds than homes in East Asia with similar climates. The data did not make sense at first. The East Asian homes were not cleaner in the way Americans use that word. They were not scrubbed harder. They did not use stronger products. What they used was timing, airflow, dry surfaces, and the habit of dealing with moisture before it had time to settle. Dr. Ulrich published his early findings in an indoor environment research journal. The paper drew moderate attention in academic circles. Then, quietly, it stopped being cited. His follow-up study, the one that specifically named Japanese household method as the primary variable, was submitted to 2 major publications in 1989. Both declined to publish it. That is just economics. The findings, however, did not disappear entirely. Japanese researchers picked them up. They matched them against their own studies on household microbiology. They confirmed the same pattern, that homes practicing traditional Japanese maintenance habits showed dramatically lower levels of airborne mold spores, lower dust mite populations, and significantly reduced indoor odor compounds compared to homes relying on commercial cleaning and masking products. The research existed, it was documented, it was peer-reviewed. It just never made it to the product aisle. Because here is the problem with the Japanese method from a commercial standpoint. It does not require anything to be purchased. Open a window, pull the laundry out of the machine immediately, change into house clothes at the door, wipe the stove while it is still warm, stand the mattress on its side once a week. None of those actions require a product. None of them generate revenue. None of them build a brand. And in a market where American households were spending an estimated $4 billion per year on air fresheners, fabric softeners, and scented cleaning products by the late 1980s, a method that replaced all of that with behavior was never going to be promoted. That is just economics. What makes this more remarkable is how old the knowledge is. These rules were not invented in a laboratory. They were not discovered through clinical trials. They were observed over centuries by ordinary people living in ordinary homes, refined through generations of trial and real-world result. 1,000 years of daily practice produced a system that modern indoor air science has now confirmed. Quietly, in journals, most people never read. The question is not whether the system works. The question is why, in 2026, the average American homeowner has never once heard of it. Part 2 answers that question from the inside, with biology, with chemistry. And with 2 studies, the cleaning industry spent a great deal of money hoping would stay buried. There is a moment every morning in millions of American homes that nobody talks about. The alarm goes off. The person rolls over. Their face lifts off a pillow that has not been washed in 3 months. They take their first breath of the day through 8 hours of accumulated moisture, dead skin cells, and the waste product of creatures so small they are invisible to the human eye. And then they walk to the kitchen and make coffee. This is not a horror story. This is biology, and biology does not care whether someone knows about it or not. The process running inside the average American home has been running for years, quietly, consistently, without interruption, and the products sold to stop it are, by documented scientific record, not stopping it at all. In 2009, researchers at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory published a study on indoor air quality in American residential homes. What they found was not subtle. The study identified over 500 distinct volatile organic compounds present in the average sealed American home. A significant portion of those compounds were not coming from outside. They were being generated inside by mold colonies, dust mite populations, and the chemical breakdown of synthetic fragrance products that had been layered onto surfaces over years of use. The air freshener was not reducing the compound count. It was adding to it. The second study came from the University of Melbourne in 2016. Researchers there tested 37 of the most commonly sold scented household products in the United States and Australia, including plug-ins, candles, fabric softeners, and sprays. Of those 37 products, 35 emitted at least one chemical classified as hazardous under American federal law. Most of them emitted several. None of them were required by law to list those chemicals on the label, because under current U.S. regulations, fragrance formulas are classified as trade secrets. The consumer buying a lavender plug-in to make their bedroom smell clean has no legal right to know what is being aerosolized into the air their children are breathing every night. That is not a conspiracy. That is just the law as it was written. And laws are written by people with interests. That is just economics. Now here is where the biology becomes uncomfortable. The human olfactory system, the mechanism responsible for smell, is not designed to report on constants. It is designed to report on changes. When a new smell enters a space, the olfactory receptors fire. The brain registers the signal. The person notices the smell. But within minutes of continuous exposure to that same smell, the receptors reduce their firing rate. The brain stops logging it as new information. This is called olfactory adaptation. Some researchers call it nose blindness. It is not a flaw in the system. It is the system working exactly as designed. In an outdoor environment where smells shift constantly with wind and movement, this adaptation makes perfect sense. The nose is freed up to detect the next change, a predator, a fire, a new food source. But inside a sealed, climate-controlled home where the same air cycles through the same HVAC filter for weeks, the adaptation becomes a trap. The homeowner goes nose blind to their own home within the first few weeks of living there. The smell does not stop. The sources, the damp machine, the loaded filter, the unventilated mattress, the unwashed pillow, continue producing compounds every single day. But the nose stopped reporting it years ago, so the person lights a candle. The candle introduces a new smell. The olfactory receptors fire. The brain registers it as clean because clean is what the marketing told them it should smell like. Within 20 minutes, the nose adapts to the candle too, so they buy a stronger one. This is the cycle the 2016 Melbourne study described in clinical language. The researchers called it chemical layering, a process where synthetic fragrance compounds are repeatedly added to an indoor environment not to replace the source compounds, but to temporarily override the olfactory signal. The source compounds remain, the mold remains, the dust mite waste remains, the volatile organic buildup remains. Only the perception changes, and only briefly. The Japanese household method addresses none of this with products, because the Japanese method does not attempt to override the olfactory signal. It removes the source. Open airflow twice a day physically pushes the saturated indoor air out and pulls fresh air in. A dry washing machine drum cannot grow mold. A mattress aired weekly cannot accumulate the moisture levels dust mites require to reproduce. A stovetop wiped warm cannot build the grease layer that oxidizes into odor compounds overnight. No compound, no smell, no product needed. The science confirmed all of this. The science was published. And then a very specific set of decisions were made by a very specific group of people in a very specific year to make sure that science never reached the person standing in the cleaning aisle trying to decide between two sizes of Febreze. That is what part 3 is about. The year, the room, the people in it, and the number on the table that made the decision easy. There's a building in Cincinnati, Ohio. It does not look like much from the outside. Corporate glass, a parking structure, a lobby with a receptionist and a company logo on the wall. But in 1991, inside that building, a meeting took place that quietly shaped what every American household would smell like for the next 30 years. And almost nobody outside that room has ever talked about it. The company was Procter & Gamble. By 1991, they were already one of the largest consumer goods corporations on earth. Their fabric softener brand, Downy, had been on American shelves since 1960. Their cleaning product portfolio generated billions in annual revenue. They were not a villain in a film. They were a corporation doing exactly what corporations are designed to do. Protect revenue. Expand market share. Remove threats before they become visible. That is just economics. What triggered the 1991 meeting was not a scandal, it was a research summary. An internal review team had compiled findings from multiple independent studies, including early versions of the indoor air quality research that would later be published by Lawrence Berkeley, and the summary landed on the desk of the Product Strategy Division with a clear conclusion. Traditional household maintenance habits, specifically those documented in East Asian household practice, were capable of eliminating the primary odor sources in a residential home without the use of any commercial product. The report did not use the word Japanese. It used the phrase behavioral substitution. Behavioral substitution meant this: if a consumer learned to open 2 windows for 15 minutes each morning, they would stop buying air fresheners. If they learned to pull laundry out immediately and leave the drum lid open, they would stop buying fabric softener within months. If they learned to wipe surfaces while warm, they would stop buying heavy-duty degreasers. The math was straightforward. A single American household spending an average of $62 per month on scented and cleaning products, multiplied across 90 million households, produced a market worth over $67 billion annually by the early 1990s. Behavioral substitution threatened every dollar of it. The decision made in that building was not dramatic. There was no memo that said, "Suppress this information." No executive gave a villainous speech. What happened was quieter and more effective than that. The research was categorized as non-actionable from a product development standpoint and filed accordingly. Non-actionable is a corporate term that means this finding does not help us sell anything, therefore it does not move forward. The findings did not get buried. They got administratively deprioritized into invisibility. That is just economics. Around the same time, a man named Dr. Michael Hodgson was working as an occupational and environmental medicine physician connected to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Dr. Hodgson had spent years documenting what he called sick building syndrome, a pattern of health complaints in people who lived and worked in sealed, poorly ventilated spaces with high concentrations of synthetic chemical compounds. His findings overlapped significantly with the indoor air quality research coming out of Berkeley. He published, he presented, he testified before a Senate subcommittee in 1993. His central argument was simple. The American indoor environment had become chemically saturated, not because of industrial pollution, but because of the products being marketed as solutions to that very problem. The cleaning industry was selling the disease and the cure in the same aisle. He named companies, he cited revenue figures, he recommended regulatory labeling requirements for synthetic fragrance compounds used in residential products. The testimony was recorded, it entered the congressional record, and then the Fragrance Research Fund, a lobbying body funded directly by the major fragrance and household product manufacturers, commissioned a counter-study. The counter-study concluded that synthetic fragrance compounds at residential exposure levels presented no documented health risk. It was published in an industry-sponsored journal. Dr. Hodgson's recommendations were not adopted. The labeling requirements were not introduced. The fragrance formula trade, secret protection remained intact. His career continued, but his findings on residential indoor air never received the legislative traction they were designed to produce. The industry spent an estimated $4.3 million on lobbying related to fragrance regulation between 1992 and 1997, $4.3 million to protect $67 billion. That is not a conspiracy. That is just a sound financial decision made by people with spreadsheets. What makes the 1991 moment significant is not that it was unusual. It was entirely ordinary. It happens in boardrooms across every major consumer industry on a regular basis. What makes it significant is what was on the other side of that decision. A 1,000-year-old system, confirmed by independent science, requiring no purchase, producing measurable results in 14 days or less, sitting in a file marked non-actionable. While that file collected dust in Cincinnati, ordinary homeowners kept buying the candles, kept pouring the softener, kept replacing the plugins every 30 days, kept assuming the smell in their home was just the way homes smell. They were never told otherwise, not by the industry, not by the regulatory bodies the industry had successfully lobbied, not by the magazines running full-page advertisements for the same products they were reviewing. The information existed. The science was real. The method was simple. It just never made it to the person who needed it, until now. Part 4 is the part the industry spent 30 years and $4.3 million making sure never got written. Exact measurements, exact steps, room by room, day by day, with a cost comparison at the end that will make the previous 30 years feel like a very expensive misunderstanding. In May 2024, a woman named Sandra Coulter sat in her kitchen in Columbus, Ohio. She was 53 years old. She had lived in the same house for 19 years. She had spent, by her own careful calculation, over $14,000 on cleaning products, air fresheners, fabric softeners, scented candles, and wax melts across those 19 years. Her house still had a smell, not a terrible smell, Just the kind of smell that made guests pause for half a second when they walked through the front door. Sandra knew about the pause. She had watched it happen 100 times. She just did not know what was causing it. A neighbor mentioned the Japanese method to her in passing. Sandra did not buy a book. She did not sign up for a course. She did not purchase a single product. She changed 14 behaviors across 14 days. By day 9, her daughter visited for the first time in 4 months and stopped in the doorway. Not because of the smell, because there was no smell, just air, clean, neutral, unremarkable air. That was the moment Sandra understood what 19 years of industry marketing had actually been selling her. The problem, repackaged as the solution, delivered monthly, automatically. Here's exactly what Sandra did, room by room, step by step. The washing machine. Every morning after the cycle finished, Sandra pulled the laundry out within 10 minutes. She left the drum lid open between every wash. Not partially, fully open. Once a week she ran a hot, empty cycle with 2 cups of white vinegar and nothing else. She stopped using fabric softener entirely. Cost of this change, $0. The vinegar cost 61 cents per cycle. What she had been spending on Downy per month, $14.70. Annual saving, $176.40 from one habit on one machine. The bedroom and mattress. Every Sunday morning, Sandra stripped the bed completely. She stood the mattress on its side against the wall. She opened both bedroom windows fully. She left it that way for 6 hours. She washed the pillows every 3 months in a hot cycle with no softener. She washed the comforter every 2 months. She switched from a solid bed base to a slatted frame. A one-time purchase of $89 from a secondhand furniture store. The dust on her bedside table, which she had been wiping every week for years, visibly reduced within the first month. Her husband, who had woken with a blocked nose every single morning for 6 years, stopped mentioning it by day 11. He had assumed it was seasonal allergies. It was the mattress. Ventilation. Every morning within 15 minutes of waking, Sandra opened one window at the front of the house and one at the back. She left them open for 15 minutes regardless of the temperature outside. Every night before bed, she repeated the same process. The cross ventilation created a pressure difference that physically pushed the stale indoor air out and pulled fresh air through. Cost, $0. Heat loss across 15 minutes in a properly insulated home is negligible. What she had been spending on Glade plugins and Febreze per month, $22.30. Annual saving from this one change alone, $267.60. The kitchen? Sandra's last task every night became the sink. Every dish washed. The strainer emptied and rinsed dry. One full kettle of boiling water poured slowly down the drain to break down the day's grease buildup inside the pipe. The basin wiped dry with a cloth kept specifically for that purpose. Counters cleared of every object. Crumbs swept. Stovetop wiped while still warm from dinner. 30 seconds, one damp cloth, nothing else required. The drain smell that had been present in that kitchen for what Sandra estimated was at least 7 years disappeared by day 5. 7 years? Gone in 5 days? Because the source was never the drain itself. It was the food particles fermenting in the wet strainer overnight, every night for 7 years. Floors. Sandra bought a dry floor wiper. Total cost $11.40 from a local store. Every morning before anyone walked through the house, she ran the dry wiper across every floor first. Then she vacuumed. Not Saturday afternoon. Every morning. Within the first hour of waking when overnight dust had fully settled and was catchable. The Saturday cleaning session that had previously taken her 3 hours was reduced to 40 minutes by week 3. Not because the house was being cleaned less thoroughly, because nothing was being allowed to accumulate long enough to require a deep clean. Surfaces and counters. Sandra mounted a shower rail inside the tub with hooks for every bottle. Nothing rested directly on a wet surface anymore. The soap dispenser was mounted on the wall. The toothbrush holder hung off the tile. The gray ring that had been building under her shampoo bottle for 8 months, the one she had been scrubbing weekly, did not return, because the surface underneath it was now dry. A dry surface cannot grow what a wet surface grows. That is not a cleaning tip. That is just chemistry. The full cost comparison. Sandra calculated her previous annual spend on masking and cleaning products at just over $740 per year. Products that did not remove the source of the smell. Products that chemically overrode her olfactory signal temporarily and then required repurchasing when her nose adapted. Her annual cost under the Japanese method, $11.40 for the floor wiper, $89 one time for the slatted bed frame, vinegar at roughly $30 per year, one pack of disposable toilet wipes at $12 per year, total first year cost, $142.40. Every year after that, approximately $42. The difference between what the industry was collecting from Sandra annually and what the Japanese method actually costs per year is just under $700, multiplied across 90 million American households. That is the number the 1991 meeting in Cincinnati was protecting. None of the 11 rules Sandra followed required a product with a brand name. None of them required a subscription. None of them required a 30-day money-back guarantee. They required 14 decisions made across 14 days inside a home Sandra already owned. The knowledge was always there. It was just filed under non-actionable by people who needed her not to have it. Now she has it, and so do you. Hidden Fix Lab does not sell products. It does not run advertisements for the industry this video just documented. What it runs is this: the information that was always available, always documented, always confirmed by independent science, and always one decision away from changing the air inside your home permanently. Pick one rule tonight, open 2 windows for 15 minutes before bed, walk into your home tomorrow morning and notice what is different. Then come back here and tell us in the comments what you noticed, because the next video goes deeper, and the industry it covers has even more to lose.